Maybe we'll start this next piece by mentioning that today is the day that the encampments on the Downtown Eastside are they just starting to clear them out? Because this is a two-stage process apparently. Is it so they're doing the low risk ones first, and then, or are they trying to get everything in one day? Or do you know?
I can't imagine they'll get everything today. So it might be that they're starting with lower risk or the easier stuff as they see it, but I'm sure this will take the remainder of the week, I would imagine.
Okay. So this is happening today, right now, as we record. The police and social workers, I guess, are down there, and city engineers, I believe, are involved, and they're trying to sort this out. So what we're talking about here is the clearing of the Downtown Eastside street camps. There's other street camps throughout Vancouver and Abbotsford, of course, but this is, I believe this one has the most people who are, most of the people who are living in tents in the greater Vancouver area are in the Downtown Eastside. Yeah. That was the last stats that I saw anyway. So this is an article talking about, I guess, a leaked document that outlines the city's plans for moving faster than they were letting on to get rid of these camps or deal with these camps. So the city of Vancouver has drawn up plans to speed up the removal of the makeshift structures and tents of people living along East Side Street or East Hastings Street, hinting force could be used if necessary. Fire chief calls for changes after propane tanks explode in tent fire. I know there's been numerous fires down there, and that's definitely a concern. This document that was apparently made public on Monday, I guess, by Stop the Sweeps, which is a coalition of advocacy groups working on the Downtown Eastside. Community advocates and business leaders are calling the city's approach into question, asking why the city would go ahead with removal when 330 new homes planned for the neighborhood won't be ready until summer. This document signals the end of Vancouver's so-called compassionate approach to encampments. Jess Gutt, an organizer with Stop the Sweeps, said in a statement, "The city and the province have failed to create enough dignified housing. They're now choosing to use blunt force to make people disappear from the street." So let's stop there and digest a little bit. So from what I've been able to read and find online, it looks like there's about 2,000 people in the greater Vancouver area who would be classified as living on the street or living in a tent that would be in this area of concern here. That's I know they do a count of, I think it's a once a year count they do of people without homes, and they figured last year there was it was a really conservative count. So what I'm going to say is that in the greater Vancouver area, there might be somewhere between 2,000 and, let's say, a ridiculously high number, but possible, of 5,000 people who have nowhere to stay. We'll use that kind of bracket of numbers. So that's a fairly large group of people, even at the low end. I see that they've got a bunch of different programs in place here to try to, I guess, get people into some kind of shelter or housing. But in this article, they talk about they're talking about some of the places being rat infested, bug infested, unsafe, and unlivable. So my question is, what is the reality of that? Like, is there places that are available right now? You'd think there have to be somewhere, right, in Vancouver where you could stay. And how much worse is it than living on the street? Like when I think of living in a tent on the Downtown East Side, I don't find that to be, like, I'm trying to understand why that would be desirable at all.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? Now, what I come up with is there's a sense of community down there. It's a generational community. There's people that have been born in that area. They've grown up, had children in that area, and the roots are actually quite deep in the downtown Eastside. So there is a community there. That would be one benefit to staying in that area. And the other would be a drug supply if you've got an addiction. And I would imagine that probably, I mean, the numbers are between 30 and 60% of people are addicted to some kind of substance. I don't know how that pans out realistically or how they even get those numbers. But I think it's safe to assume that some drugs are involved in the situation.
Sure.
It would be my guess or estimation, and I could be wrong, that mental health has more to do with this than anything else, combined with what we're seeing just generally in our society and culture, which is a further divide between the haves and have-nots. So continued financial pressure, continual revolving door, never preventative, always reactive mental health healthcare system, and the current ongoing toxic drug crisis are all contributing to a situation that is very complex. So you've got these people living down there. Now, my question is, if you went and I want to, when I come down, I'm going to come down there and visit with you in the Lower Mainland. And I'd like to go talk to some people down there about what their ideal solution would be. Where, and I think it's important to understand too, that not everybody is going to be able to answer that question, because some of the people in those, if you're living in a tent in the downtown east side, you could have mental health issues that make it impossible for you to even cognitively function in a normal enough way to answer a question that requires that kind of executive function. So that's another layer to the problem. However, there must be some people, some advocates or people who are speaking for the general population down there who have some idea of how they want things to proceed and where they see things going. What are your thoughts on that?
I think just going back a moment, I think, the alternative to the encampments, unless someone comes up with a more creative, viable option, in that neighborhood, it's single room occupancy hotels, many of which are still owned by slumlords, many of which are not perceived as safe, not perceived as particularly livable. And I think if you are someone who's using opioids, it probably is less safe. Your risk of death is probably higher if you're living in a single room occupancy hotel, where there are less eyes on you, or where your friends are that much further out of reach, even if it's not that far.
What about smoking? I know now, if in the hospital, you can smoke fentanyl, you can smoke meth. So I'm assuming that when they're offering these other places to live, like if you're going to offer somebody a sleazy hotel or a sleazy hotel room or whatever that may or may not be structurally, I mean, I don't know if the concern is that it's like a borderline condemned building that might collapse on you, or are people maybe concerned that the building will catch on fire and everyone will die because people are smoking, and that's a possibility.
I think that is probably a concern. It's probably very personal for each individual, I think, but the lack of creative alternatives put forth by the city, by BC Housing, by the people who could actually directly impact it right now. It's not there, and then this decision to move forward seemingly in haste of we got to clean this up now, because there's been I don't know if they're using, in that article, it reads that they're using the exploding propane tanks as their justification.
Okay. Well, I'll read on here and see what they say.
Do.
At a news conference this morning, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim was asked whether the direction laid out in the document came from the mayor's office, city council, or elsewhere, and whether council has been briefed on the plans. Sim refused to answer the question, saying instead that large entrenched encampments aren't an acceptable model going forward. What he sees on the streets now is an increased level of violence. The area has become a lot less safe, he said. When asked again to answer whether council had been briefed, Sim replied, "We get briefed on a lot of things. At the end of the day, these recommendations, like other recommendations, they pretty much come from the city staff, and then we get to talk about them." Many residents say they feel safer and more comfortable on the street than in many of the neighborhood's SROs and shelters. Do you know what an SRO is?
Yeah, single room occupancy hotel. Yeah.
Which have been called unsanitary and unsafe. People don't turn down livable housing, Kayleigh Lorraine, a Downtown Eastside resident, said at a news conference Monday. They're turning down rat-infested, bug-infested, unsafe, unlivable housing. So these SROs, or single room occupancies, must be pretty bad if that's the case. And that's something that I'd like to ask Garth about that, because he probably know what those people are facing.
I had the opportunity to do a ride along with BC Ambulance in 2015, and the state of the SROs was pretty shocking then. Very shocking.
Okay. So given the choice of living on the street or living in one of these SROs, what would you do?
Oh man, I think if I was in a position where I had encountered violence, where I had encountered threats to my safety, where maybe I was, my friends had died within the confines of an SRO, or rats and bugs or whatever other sort of factors weighed in, I might make that decision. I don't know.
The decision to live on the street instead.
I might.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap my mind around. I mean, you would think, I guess, what is it, about 80% of the people living down there are men. Mm-hmm. So if you think about this from a safety point of view, I mean, maybe it is safer to be kind of in the crowd, like, and tents are not really like, but then again, I don't know how private these SROs are as well. I mean, do they even have doors? Do the doors work? Can you lock them? Mm-hmm. And then it's, trying to think of it. If you're a woman and you're in a situation like this, what kind of, what level of security do you have? Mm-hmm. Is it easier to access help from the street than it is from, although I guess most people living down there don't want that kind of help anyway. So yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, this is a hard one for me to understand. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around, especially without seeing it. I mean, I can certainly understand. Well, I'll continue this. I'll continue to read here.
Can I say one thing here before we go on?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got big opinions about Ken Sims in Vancouver. He has a nursing background, first of all, which is just kind of an interesting frame of reference to become the mayor of a city with such public health issues, such public health and a so-called, as we've just talked about, a so-called public health emergency. And I think his MO is to quote clean up that city, and to by any means necessary. And the voters that voted him in under the promise of bringing in 100 new police officers, of bringing in mental health nurses and staff to work with the police. And that was his mandate, was to clean up that city. And so for him to say, well, we're briefed on a lot of things, what a cheeky answer. What a kind of a slough off answer, I think. Okay. Because I think he does know, because I think that is his mandate, is to clean it up and by force, as they say, by force or any means necessary, as Malcolm X said.
Okay. We'll continue on. These encampments are dangerous for those living in them, those of us who live near them in private housing, and even for those trying to help. As a resident of the Downtown Eastside who has a justifiable expectation that I can live in a safe city and that I'll be able to use public spaces and my taxes that my taxes pay for, like parks and sidewalks. I'm very happy to hear that the city is finally listening to those who would endlessly destroy every last safe and decent thing that I enjoy in this city. Sidewalks aren't homes. Parks aren't homes. Sidewalks and parks are there for all of us to enjoy. I'll be happy to stop living in fear in my own neighborhood. So there must be many people who feel this way.
Sure.
I mean, I haven't been to any of the pharmacies on the Downtown Eastside in probably nearly a decade. So I don't know what it's like down there. As far as business is concerned, I can't imagine that there's any businesses that are doing well that aren't somehow linked to this issue. Would that be fair to say? Or I know when I was last there was a fairly distinct line of gentrification.
Yeah, exactly, Nathan. And that line has certainly spread dramatically in the last, if it's been 10 years for you, it has encroached further and further into the Downtown East Side, for sure.
Okay. So there would be more gentrification taking place. Therefore, you would expect to see less services, and these, wherever they were maybe getting support from before, has been diminished somewhat. I suppose that could be part of it. I have trouble looking at this issue, and I think somewhere in the middle there's a compassionate stance. I don't understand why the city would even let a tent city get to this point. Like, if we're having such a problem with people finding places to live, then you'd think that would be an issue that would be addressed much earlier on. And from what I've looked into, as far as stats are concerned in other cities, especially in the States, the cities that have handled this problem by providing services through, it takes money to fix this problem, but the preventative money that you spend, you make back in spades later on. I looked into a few different studies on what it costs in BC to have a person living on the street. And it can be, I saw some crazy high numbers that include the average number of ambulance trips, hospital stays, mental health services, social worker visits, all the way up to north of 150,000 a year per person. And then I saw some studies that looked a little more reasonable, where it cost roughly 55,000 Canadian to have somebody living on the streets, where with an efficient, well put together, this is something that would take time, but if you structured something that was designed to house people in a dignified way with the supports that they need, it can be done for less than that, or very close to the same amount of money. I've seen figures as low as 35,000 and as high as around 55,000. So financially, it looks like it's kind of a wash, or in some cases even cheaper to offer these people a place to live. However, having worked very close to that area before and talked with people who spent the majority on I remember talking to one gentleman who was in a scooter, and he would park his scooter out in front of my pharmacy, and he would panhandle. But he didn't, he's a very large gentleman, didn't look like he was, he's fairly well dressed. And I couldn't figure out what was going on with the guy. So I started talking to him. I said, what's going on with you? I see you out here every day. Like, where do you go at night? And he says, I go back to my condo. I said, your condo? And he said, yeah, the city put me in a condo, but I don't, I like it out here better. So he would rather spend his whole day out there panhandling than spend any time other than sleeping in his condo. So my question would be, I guess, and like you said before, there's going to be a smattering of different kind of opinions of what the best case scenario is. But maybe some of the people living in this area are maybe they're just anarchists, and what that means is that they're basically, they don't want any kind of government at all. which I can, believe me, I can understand.
Sure.
And if that's the case, then maybe even like trying to fit them into the model that everyone else is living is not going to work. And if that, then like you said before, where no creative options have been put forth, like I think you're right about that. And I think that these people who are in these circumstances really need to be, as thoroughly as possible, there needs to be a discussion about what they want to see. How would you like to live? And if the answer is that I don't want the government, or I don't want the police, I don't want these things involved in my life, then I think maybe that's reasonable, but it's not reasonable to do where they're doing it. So then what you could do is set up like almost like a red light district, where you would have a section of, whether it's the Downtown Eastside or what's left of it, where basically there's an agreement between the people who live there and the police and the services that we normally would send in, that due to the way people are choosing to live their life there, which is different than the rest of the population, we're going to make that not a lawless area, but we're going to adapt the laws to that area. So police are not going to be involved in any kind of drug transactions there at all.
Yeah.
I don't care if you've got 10 pounds of crack cocaine on the street in a wheelbarrow. Nobody's bothering you. Same with prostitution. In fact, you could have it set up so that there's very much like the red light district in Amsterdam, where they have access to safe places to practice, and there's monthly, or I think they do weekly health checks. They can they have emergency services if they need them. These things could be set up in such a way that maybe caters more to what those people are capable of do. Like there's a level of capability there, and then there's a level of probably maybe just political tilt that is not compatible with normal society, which I think is very understandable considering normal society. But the way it's set up now, I mean, you can't. I agree with you that they're using these fires and stuff as a, safety is that everything is in the name of safety these days, right?
Of
they
course.
use that for every goddamn. We got to make it safe. Like we're the most terrified species on the planet. All of a sudden, everyone's afraid of everything. But I agree that's like you can't have people just living in those conditions. So. If it is the case that they have some kind of housing that is agreeable to the people living there and it's not ready yet, well, then again, I would say that's on the mayor, or that's on whoever let this get to this point, has been sitting on their thumb for too long.
Yeah. Nathan, that's what came to mind for me as we were talking about this was going back to our last episode with Dr. Michaud about codependency, and like the question of how is this relationship working for you? And I would love to ask that to civic or municipal governments, like how has this relationship or lack of a relationship or just arrangement, quote unquote, with the homeless populations, how has this worked for you? I think about Abbotsford because that's my hometown, and there's a large encampment there that is very close to the downtown business district, so to speak, but it's removed by about maybe 300 meters, maybe a little bit more, and it's quite densely populated, and it's right down by the train tracks, and it's in sort of a partially wooded area, and I've developed the impression that it kind of works for the city, that the city has a level of just feeling kind of satisfied, like, okay, well, they're kind of tucked back. They've evicted them many, many times before. They got into, as we talked about with Ward Draper, they got into trouble for putting chicken manure on the encampment at one point. So now they just have this approach of like, we're going to bring in trucks once a week or so and help clean up the area so that there's at least not accumulation of garbage and refuse, but otherwise we're going to kind of keep our hands off, and this kind of works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a place like Abbotsford, there's been a little bit of a distance there, less incidents of random acts of violence. It has kind of worked. And I think in Vancouver for a long time, it also kind of worked. But the connection with gentrification, I don't think is a coincidence. That as new condos and gentrified living spaces generate a lot of income for landowners, as those have encroached on the Downtown Eastside, I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think it's suddenly in Vancouver, they're saying, this doesn't work for us anymore, or we want out of this arrangement. And so like a parent who's sort of fed up, they are acting that out in a way they're acting it out like a parent who's lost their temper.
Right.
Or kind of blown their stack and that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
We've had enough. And we're going to come in there and clean out your room, kind of a thing. And it doesn't look patient. It doesn't look empathetic or compassionate. But it worked for them for a long time, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't hear anyone from the city of Vancouver saying that, like this once worked for us and now it doesn't anymore.
That was the question that I wrote next to this next section here. And the city, this is the part that documents what they're going to propose now, which is the city document proposes a 2-stage plan with engineering workers and the Vancouver Police starting with lower risk sites along Hastings, east of Main Street and west of Carroll Street. A key part of the plan is that city crews with police support would no longer disengage when tensions rise or protesters' advocates become too disruptive, according to bulletin points in the document for stage 1. It did not lay out specific timelines. For stage 2, it would be a VPD-led operation in which all residents and structures in high-risk zones identified as areas with residents who are combative or aggressive, or structures that have been repeatedly removed would be targeted for removal. So like you said before, they're going to start with the less combative people and then kind of work their way towards the more violent centers, I guess. It would involve a significantly larger number of staff and police, and sections of the block would be closed to the public, which is interesting. So they're expecting basically like a battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Residents in the encampment area would be given a notice of non-compliance and given 7 days to leave. So I think that like this part is good. The actions, like I could see what they're trying to do, and I agree with the giving them a chance to get out of there. City homelessness services would reach out to residents and encourage them to accept shelter offers and or any housing that may be available, which would be reasonable, except like you said, the kind of switch up is probably what's going to cause the biggest problem here, from where we've been allowing this, and now all of a sudden we're coming in and it's business time. We're going to get rid of everything.
Yeah.
So I think today we will, even with if they start on the areas that they think are going to be less combative, I think it's going to be, we might see some, will certainly be some violent encounters.
I think I have to say I'm suspicious of the blockades being set up around the perimeter. To me,
well,
I don't think they want this filmed. I don't think they want individuals with camera phones.
It's going to get filmed for sure. There'll be drones in there, I guarantee it. But I think it's more of I believe they're afraid of a backlash, public backlash, to the point where Vancouver is a weird city. It's a no fun sleeper, kind of strange mix of people until you get them excited about something like hockey comes to mind. But and then they're capable of acting like animals, just violent. I mean, the way things can turn in that city, it's shocking.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say they're probably worried about getting flanked by citizens who are
Protesting.
anticipating this, and coming in and maybe seeing something like what they saw with Antifa in the States, right?
Yeah.
So and of course, it's not going to be great for them to have like this is going to be a PR situation that can be used politically. That stuff to me is all nonsense. I know the majority of people in Vancouver want these people removed. I think if you asked and did a Democratic poll, most people would be comfortable with this. So I think that they're not concerned as much with how it's. I mean, the guy got in, like you said, on the premise of taking care of this problem. Now he's going to do it, right? And also reading the comments. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any concern there. It's basically us them thinking, right? Like people aren't human, really. Just get rid of them. That's kind of the thought process. So following stage 2, roving teams of city engineering and VPD staff would be deployed to enforce the decampment and remove structures both inside the Hastings encampment and around the city as needed. They would initially operate daily and could operate for several weeks or longer, according to the document. So this will be a zero tolerance approach. Like we're taking it down, and if you put it back up, we're going to be standing there taking it down again. And I don't know what. That's another thing that I would be interested in knowing is what are the repercussions for somebody who, say a mental health patient who's been caught in the, in the hospital, out of the hospital, in the hospital. Now he's living in a tent. The police come. This guy thinks it's, who knows what kind of event this person is perceiving, and reacts accordingly to what their perception of the world is. What is the punishment for this individual? I think we used to put those type of people in institutions, correct?
Correct.
So what's the plan here? Because this is more of a move that you would make to kind of round people up and take them to a facility, and the facility in the past has been either jail, and we don't do institutions in the way that we used to anyway. We do still sort of, but
have they even thought of those things? Like, are those presumably those are the discussions that are happening, or is this kind of short-sighted? It feels short-sighted to me. It feels short-sighted.
Well, it's reactive. I mean, it's due to probably, I mean, not just the fact that the mayor ran on the promise of doing this, but also I know that there's people who have money down there and are interested in having this problem taken care of. And so there's probably significant financial incentives or pressure with, support for the mayor and his constituents based on having this problem solved. So I think we're going to do it. That's what's happening. Now, figure out the details one way or the other. I mean, they must know that there's going to be, this is not an easy problem to solve. It's happening all over the place. It's been handled better in some areas of the U.S. And worse in some areas for sure. But it's not an easy thing to fix. So we'll see. I mean, maybe they have a structured plan where every type of individual, okay, here's a person who's doesn't seem to be in touch with reality. This person goes to the hospital for a mental health assessment and then, follows a stream that way, or, maybe they've got it planned out. I don't know. Both the Federal Housing Commissioner and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing have called for an end to the use of police as a response to encampments. In a perfect world, sure. In a world where prevention is, the mainstay of our politicians' activities, where they're looking at things and preventing them before they get out of hand, sure. But that doesn't seem to be anywhere near the way we handle things in this country. And it's certainly not how we handle it in BC. We wait until it's a huge problem, and then we throw a reactive whatever at it, right? So who else are you going to send in here?
I don't know, but I wish it was somebody else.
Yeah.
Again, the context in Vancouver is so unique in that the mayor of Vancouver was voted in on the promise of cleaning up the city. He was voted in on the promise of 100 new cops. He had the unusual support of the police union saying that we will back him. And so there's vested interest both ways here. Mm-hmm. And so the police are acting out a political will, it feels like to me.
Maybe what we're seeing here is one of the beginnings of the pendulum swing that's coming.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think that this is the merging of the war on drugs and a war on poverty that is happening too. Like I think that those lines are blurred in this instance. I don't think it is about drugs. I think drugs have little to do with it. The overdose deaths have little or nothing to do with this. It's about poverty, and it's about a city that is just so dysfunctional in terms of that kind of that cohabitation.
Yeah, one of the most expensive cities in the world to live.
Yeah.
So it goes on. Staff developing the plan would ensure that people forced out of the encampment who had nowhere to go would be connected to outreach with a means for further follow-up, according to the document. Anticipate sufficient shelter beds will be available, reads a bulletin point. Hope to have VCH on standby for mental health supports in discussions. I mean, we're familiar with these types of documents and bullet points, and what this means is this is writing on a paper that is not connected to reality.
Right.
Like you can say that all you want. We know that there's a shortage of there's a shortage of resources in both of these areas, a big shortage. So okay,
yeah, like Vancouver Coastal Health, VCH, they're full.
Mm-hmm.
These facilities are full. So what imaginary beds are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's like you call in the army, put Unit 5 on standby, get them ready to deploy. Sir, Unit 5 it doesn't exist. It's I don't care. Do it anyway. Okay.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Taylor Varell, Director of Communications for the Mayor's Office, said he had not seen the document and could not comment on it. He reiterated, blah, 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 basically said the same thing as the mayor, and ended a statement with, this work is critical to addressing continual life safety risk on East Hastings. So there's a little bit more here, and it goes on to talk about a gentleman named Wally Wargolet. It's quite the handle. Executive Director of the Gastown Business Improvement Society, said that while he and other business association members have been meeting with senior city staff since July, their concerns have not changed. So this is what I'm, talking about. There's going to be special interest groups that are economically pressuring them. We are worried that there is not adequate housing to actually put people in. Then there will just be a disbursement of the encampment. And what are your thoughts on that? That's a pretty legitimate concern, right? Because, you're going to disperse this thing, you're going to clean it all up. If you're not dealing with the people in some way, then they just kind of, it's like, you knock down a hornet's nest and the hornets all fly around. You take the hornet's nest away, they come back for quite a while trying to figure out what happened to their nest. And sometimes they'll start to rebuild, right? And they're anticipating this happening. So is this now going to be a continual battle with the police where it's a game of we put up a tent, you take it down for the summer? Is that possibly what?
It probably will be. I would anticipate that there will be new encampments that are set up elsewhere. Yeah. I would, because I think that's what historically is what happens. That's what happened in Oppenheimer Park in Vancouver. Right. That's certainly what has happened in Abbotsford, where an encampment gets taken down and then like 100 meters down the street, a new one comes up.
Yeah. And Burnaby has a significant one as well. I think it's not very close, but it's the closest big one. So maybe you would see, I mean, I don't know how that would work. Like, that's why I would like to talk to somebody down there to get a feel for how, how deep do those roots go in that area? Like, how hard are those people willing to fight for what remains of that area as whatever it is.
Yeah. And, like the notion that the police will move in again with force in some instances and tell people to take down their camps, take down their tents and move along. And then, by the way, there are services that we can offer you, but you're going to be waiting, or they're full, or you're in a queue. These are all recipes for frustration and for disillusionment and violence and I think kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy that's been set up here, because then there will be acts of violence and people who are extremely upset to have to move along, and they will say, see, they took a swing at a cop or something like that.
It's a win-win. Yeah. Or God forbid a police officer gets killed or something, right?
Yeah.
And then it's basically from that moment on, it's a no mercy, zero compassion approach.
Yeah. It's just so dysfunctional right now. And this story is dysfunctional. And we're talking to Garth next week, so we'll have the opportunity to follow up and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll just read the last bit of this quickly here, and we'll wrap this segment up. So the number of people living in tents or other structures along East Hastings reached a peak last summer when Vancouver Fire Chief Karen Fry issued an order to remove the roughly 150 tents or other structures that line the street due to fire risks. They go on to talk about how there's been a record number of fires in the encampments, as well as a single resident occupancy or single room occupancy units. A lot of concern. There was a couple of people killed in the Winters Hotel fire. That was a part of that, I guess. We'll end with all we've been asking for is somewhere to go. Instead, they want us to disappear. But that's why they're bringing the police, an activist and resident of the tent city said in a statement about the proposed plan. They need to work with us. Bringing in more police will just create more trauma. I totally see the point of this activist statement. And I beg the question, they need to work with us. What does that mean? Is this a group that can be worked with, or is it a fragmented, ungovernable mass of people that just don't, for whatever reason, fit into our ideal society's boundaries?
Well, yeah, and I mean, clearly in a city like Vancouver, they don't. I mean, I think we're seeing that there's a growing intolerance and a growing disconnect there, despite, all we know now in 2023, despite the toxic drug crisis and the deaths, we've learned that doesn't matter, that doesn't sway opinion. And there's lots of different examples where you could say, no, that hasn't swayed the opinion, that hasn't swayed the opinion. So
no, all that works. It appears to me that the only thing that people are influenced by en masse is fear.
Yeah.
If you throw fear at them, you can get their attention. Compassion doesn't do, and this isn't, I'm not being a complete nihilist or pessimist about human behavior here. What I'm saying is there are more people among us who are governed by fear than there are champions who are governed by charity and concern for one another, like Pastor Ward Draper.
Yeah.
That's a shining beacon of what a human can be, right? And I know you're not perfect, Ward, but you are rare. That's what I'm seeing. I see most people just easily being swayed or pushed or coerced, and all you have to do is throw a little fear.
Yeah. Safety
concern. It's a this. It's a that. It's, oh my God, your kids. It's a and it doesn't matter whether it's rooted in reality. It doesn't matter. It's just people don't have the time, the wherewithal. They don't have they're too busy living their lives, whatever it is. I know it's hard. It is hard being compassionate for other people. I struggle with it too.
Yeah,
I really do. But yeah, I don't know. Who knows what life could throw at you? You could be homeless. You could be the next person who doesn't have anywhere to live. Who knows what the next 10 years will bring, right? Maybe the people who are making 50,000 and dual income and have an apartment will be the next ones on the street.
Yeah, exactly.
And then your empathy will maybe change a little bit.
Absolutely. My mom uses the expression a lot. There, but for the grace of God, go I. And whether it's God or the creator or whatever, the universe, it could happen to any one of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, Corey. Well, we'll leave it there. I'm looking forward to talking to Garth again. That's going to be fantastic. Very pleased that he's willing to come in and chat with us. I know he's a very busy guy.
Yep.
So his perspective is always interesting. And like I said, having somebody who's right in the mix of it and has been for a while is very valuable information. So lots of questions for him, and we'll leave it there for now and look forward to that.
Yeah, likewise. And I'm sure there's another news segment or two that we will have coming up here. So
yeah. All right, buddy.
Okay. Thanks, Nathan. See you all soon.